We are at Masechet Eruvin, Daf Pe Aleph 81, and we are going to attempt to complete the seventh perek of Eruvin today. So we have two Mishnayot to go. The subject of the first one is ingredients for the Eruv. What can you use? And that has to be a whole loaf. So not only what it's made out of, but also its shape. And after that, then last Mishnah will be about vicarious acquisition. If I'm acquiring an eruv of different types on behalf of other people, how does that work exactly? Can you do it with money? And other related topics. So we jump right into the Mishnah. Bakol me'aravin u'mishtatefin chutz min hamayim u'min hamelach. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, so if you have a good memory, this will sound familiar because the third perek began with the same words that you can use anything to make an eruv, any type of food, except for water and salt, because those two things are not nourishing. It has to be something that would be eaten as part of a meal that is nourishing. So, but anything else is okay. The Gemara is going to ask why the Mishnah is repetitive, right? It's rare, but it does happen that there are Mishnayot that are exactly the same word for word. Sometimes it's between Masechtot if it's an overlapping topic, but here it's within the same Masechet. So that's something we'll discuss. And here it's Divrei Rabbi Eliezer only. I'm just trying to look in the third perek. It says Bakol Me'arvin, and it does not say that it's the words of Rabbi Eliezer. So it makes it even more interesting that beforehand in the third perek it's a Stam Mishnah, and here it's a Machloket. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer is lenient and says you can use anything. Rabbi Yoshua Omer Kikar Hu Eruv. He says it has to be bread. And furthermore, another limitation. Afilu ma'afeh se'ah vehu perusa en me'arvin ba. Even if it's a gigantic loaf, the size of a se'ah, if it's cut up, it's no good. It has to be whole, and so you cannot use it if it's not whole. But if it's a tiny one, the size of a little coin, this is an Isar coin. It's a Roman coin. This is like a dime. It's worth 8 perutot. So a peruta is the smallest. It is the second to smallest, or maybe like a nickel. So it's a very small. If you have a loaf of bread, just this tiny, this is like those tiny little pitas. Right, that's fine as long. But if it's whole, then you can use it. So the size doesn't matter, but rather it has to be a whole loaf and it has to be bread. So Rabbi Yoshua is much more limiting than Rabbi Eliezer. That's the Mishnah. Okay, Gemara jumps right in. Tanena hadazimna. Bakol me'aravin mishtatefin chutz min hamayim ve'hamelach. We already learned this in the third perek in the Mishnah that you can use anything except for salt and water. Amar Rabba lapuke medRabbi Yoshua damar kikar in midi acharina la kamashmalan bakol. Oh, we had to say it again here because now it's in contrast to Rabbi Yoshua, and so it says bakol. You can use anything, and so that now you'll know that if you heard Rabbi Yoshua say that, I wouldn't know. Do we follow that? It says no, we don't follow Rabbi Yoshua. You can use anything. Okay, and halacha l'maaseh will be that it does have to be bread. Okay, but right now that's what Abba is saying. Now hold on. Itibe Abaye. Abaye asks a question from a Braita to Rabba. Bakol me'arvin erube haserot ubakol mishtatefin shitufe mevoot. Velo amru le'arev bapat ela b'haser bilvad. So this Braita says you can use anything you want for eruv chaserot, and you can use any kind of food also for shituf mevaot. But when they said bread, the bread is a chatzer, eruv chatzerot has to be with bread. Now this baraita is self-contradictory because the beginning says you can use anything, and then the end of it says, oh, when they said you have to use bread, that's for a chatzer. Okay, fine. So a chatzer, eruv chatzerot has to be bread. Other things you can use other items, but how do you understand this word bakol at the beginning? So obviously we can't just leave it like that. So rather bakol must mean maybe any kind of bread. So manshamat le damar pat in midi acharini la Rabbi Yoshua vekatani bakol. So who says the last part? That it has to be bread, that would be Yoshua. And yet it says bakol. So therefore, maybe bakol means any kind of bread, not just anything at all. And so too here, the word bakol, you could have interpreted to mean, it could be interpreted to mean any kind of bread. So you know what? It's really not so clear that this comes to exclude Rabbi Yoshua. Rather, let's give a different answer. Ella amar Baba bar Hanala pukemed Rabbi Yoshua de amar shelemain perusala kamashmalan bakol. Okay, so we're sticking with this idea that we need to repeat this here again to exclude Rabbi Yoshua, but it's not to exclude Rabbi Yoshua about the ingredients, but rather about the size, the fact that Rabbi Yoshua says has to be whole. That's what we're saying. Bakol, even if it's not whole. That's why we are repeating this here. Okay, good. So that answer stands. Now that we know that, let's try to figure out the reason. Upirusa maita la. Why not? Why can't you use a broken loaf of bread? Because of enmity, because of jealousy. In other words, if we are all contributing to an eruv, right, and then I put a broken piece in, and you all put whole pieces in, right? So then you're all going to get upset. He says you all went and got a nice new bread. I took a half-eaten roll and threw it in. So this is going to cause tension, jealousy between the members of the Eruv. And the whole point of the Eruv is to create community, to create peace, that we're all sharing something. Therefore, we should all share equally. Even though it's true, I could put something small and you put something big, but fine, at least it's something whole, something respectable, and not something that I already took 3 bites out of. That does not, that's not going to bring peace. All right, so that is the reason. Yeah.
I ask you about Eruv Tavshilin. So did that become like the custom where we do the bread and the egg?
Mm-hmm.
Or was it's
Eruv
just
Tavshilin also. It would be these things would apply. That you should use a whole bread. Yeah.
right?
I mean, actually, this reason would not apply to that because in this Eruv Tavshilin, you're doing it for yourself. It's not joining in with, you're not joining breads with other people. So that's a good question. Would this reasoning also, would the halacha also apply to Eruv Tavshilin, that would also need to be whole? That is a good question, and I'm not sure of the answer. Okay, yeah, that's a good thing to look up. Okay, but this is different from the, you need a whole 2 breads for Shabbat. But that's out of respect. You want to show respect to the Shabbat meal, so you want to have 2 whole pieces of bread. Okay. Amar le Rav Acha bered Ravad Rav Asher irvu kulan bifrusot mahu. So I have a question. If that's the reason, what if all of us gave broken pieces of bread? Right, and that way there won't be any enmity, any jealousy, because we all agreed. Let's all just do take half pieces of bread, and so we're all equal. So logically, that should be fine. This is, yes, it might be good for 1 week and 2 weeks, but eventually someone is going to give a whole loaf, and 2 people are going to give a whole loaf, and then they're going to be upset everybody else. So better to make one rule once and for all that everybody should give a whole loaf, because the other way is not sustainable. Good. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Shaul nitila hemenu kedei halata chedei dimua marbin lo ba'is. Okay, this is an exception. Even though we said it has to be a whole loaf, if you took a loaf and you took a little bit out of it, but not because you took it for yourself, but rather challah, you have to take challah. Usually you take challah while still dough before you bake it. But if you didn't, you could still take a piece of it after it's baked. And so that you take to the side and you give it to the Kohen. Nowadays we burn it. That's a little bit. So it's just the tiniest bit. So no one's going to miss that. Also, if a little bit of tirumah fell into the pot while I was making it, so then it's a problem because there's tirumah in there. So what I have to do is I have to take out an equivalent amount of bread that will be, but that's usually like 1% or less. So therefore, since these two things are very very small, and everybody knows it's for good reason that you need to do it, so that's not going to cause enmity. No one's going to be bothered that that little piece is missing. So you can still use it for an eruv. Okay, Tanya, hold on, is that true? Kedeh dimu'ah me'arvin lo ba, kedeh halata and me'arvin lo ba. We have a braita that says that agrees. Yes, a little bit of turuma, if you take out, it's still okay for an eruv. But hala, if you take out, it's not good for an eruv. And you said either, even taking out both, or either one is fine. So how are we going to reconcile Rabbi Yochanan ben Shaul with the Braita? Lakashya habechalat nachtom, habechalat balabait. It depends what kind of dough it is. Is it a big dough that that a baker makes, or a smaller one that a personal one that makes, a single person makes? What's the difference? Titnan. We have a Mishnah in Masechet Chala. Says shur chala echad mesim arba'ah. How much chala do you have? How much do you have to give us chala? 1 out of 24. That number, that ratio applies to preparing dough for oneself or for your own wedding feast, your own party. Then it's 1 out of 24. So that is a significant amount. But a baker or a woman who's not a professional baker, but she does sell it in the market, they only have to give 1 out of 48. The idea here is that they're making a giant dough, so 1 out of 48 is still a significant amount. If I make a personal loaf and making a smaller amount, 1 out of 48 is going to be negligible. It's not a respectable amount to give. So therefore, the ratio has to be bigger. So anyway, we're using this to answer the question that when we said that the Tana said that a loaf that's missing that amount is okay, that is talking about a baker's challah, because it's such a small amount, such a small ratio that no one's going to miss it. And the other statement that says halata is no good in this baraita, that was talking about a personal loaf, which is going to be 1 out of 24, and that's going to be a noticeable difference then, and people will be bothered that you gave a broken loaf. All right, so we resolved that. Amar Rav Chisda, tifaraha bekesam me'arevin lo ba. Oh, we have a workaround. Even if there's a piece missing, if you took a toothpick and you closed it up, that's fine. Remember, every time we're talking about a challah, this is not like the Ashkenazi braided chalot, right? We're probably talking more like pita bread. And so, right, you take a piece off of the pita bread, and so you're going to notice it. But if you take a toothpick and you stitch it up and make it look nice, then it's okay. People won't be bothered by the missing piece. You can kind of hide it. This is like, my parents gave me a birthday cake on Zoom for my birthday, and so that was very nice of them. But then after they turned it around, then the other side of the cake was missing. They already ate it. So, but from from one side it looked like it was all there. Okay, so it's all about the optics. Vehatanya and me'alvin lo ba. Hold on, we have a baraita that says that in this kind of case you cannot use it. Lakashya hadiya tifra hadela yediya tifra. It depends. Is the seam conspicuous? Then you can use it. But if it's not conspicuous, then you can use it. So if you're able to hide it well, then it's fine. Okay, because it is all about optics in this case. I mean, it doesn't matter, from the letter of the law, as long as you're giving in something, it doesn't matter. It could just be a small amount. We saw last time it could be the amount of a date, and even if it's a small, a small roll. So really, it's because of jealousy. So if nobody notices, then no won't bother anybody. Then it'll be fine. Okay, so now about the ingredients, not about the shape. So he says not only regular wheat bread, but also rice bread or millet bread. That's also fine. You can use that for an eruv. He disagrees. Rice bread, fine, but millet bread, people don't really eat that. It's not so edible. So no, you can't use that. Lentil bread. Actually sounds good. He says, yes, that's fine. Hold on. Ini v'hahi dehavya b'shnei demor Shemuel v'shadye lekalbe v'la'achalaha. Hold on, but there was that lentil bread in the days of Moshe Shemuel. He made that lentil bread, and it was so horrible. They gave it to the dogs, and even the dogs wouldn't eat it. So therefore, lentil bread should not be used for an eruv because it's not edible. Okay, so what do we do now? We have a contradiction between these two statements. Okay, that bread that was unedible, it was made out of lentils and other ingredients, and that's why it was a mixture of all kinds of grains, and it didn't mix well, did not taste good. How do we know that a mixture of lentils and other things is bad food? Dichtib. ואתה קח לך חיטין ושעורים ופול ועדשים ודוחן וחוסמים. This comes from Ezekiel. You heard of Ezekiel bread? Why is it called Ezekiel bread? Well, it comes from here, Ezekiel chapter 4. Hashem tells Ezekiel to do certain things to show the great punishment that is coming upon the nation. So he has to lie on one side for a long time, for many days, to show 390 days, because this is the suffering that's going to come. So he's going to do this in public, and everybody sees this is, prophets wouldn't only speak, they would also demonstrate through actions what's going on. So this is, took a lot of a lot of personal suffering to Yechezkel to show that. And then besides that, he says, I want you to go take wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and emmer, and put them in a vessel and bake them into bread. And you have to eat that while you're lying on your side. You have to eat only that for 390 days. And this is how much you eat per day. In other words, not only do you have to eat this coarse, horrible bread, you can't even eat that much of it. This is like that joke, the old Jewish woman in the restaurant that say, this food in this restaurant is inedible. The other one says, and the portions are so small. Well, what does it matter? The portions are so small if you're not going to eat it anyway. Okay, and you can only drink a little bit of water. And then he says you should eat it as like regular food, like barley, and it should be baked on human excrement. A disgusting way of baking it. It would, stink and be unclean. And he's a Kohen, and usually Kohanim have to, eat things in purity and respectable way. Okay, so Yechezkel is going to do all this as a demonstration to the horrors and the hunger that is going to come to the nation. Anyway, we're quoting that here to show that if you make bread out of lentils and all other ingredients, then it's a very unappetizing bread, and you cannot use that for an eruv. Okay, so good. We learned that from Yechezkel. While we mentioned Yechezkel, a couple more points about it. רב פאפא אמר ההיא סלויה בסועת האדם אביה דכתיב והיא בגללי סעת האדם תעוגנה לעיניהם. It was cooked by burning human excrement. That is what it says in the next pasuk. Now, what does it mean that you eat it like barley? The pashat is you would eat it like you normally eat barley bread. That would be his normal food. Instead of se'orim, you can revocalize to shiurim, that you have only a certain amount. You have, even this is rationed. In other words, when the time of famine comes, there's going to be barely any good food, and even the bad food that's around is going to be rationed. That this, when you prepare it, you have to prepare it like barley bread and not like wheat bread. In other words, it's going to be very coarse. In those days, wheat bread was the top, that was for humans, and barley was eaten by animals or poor people. And so this bread has to be prepared in a substandard way. All right. So nowadays, we like barley a lot, and Ezekiel bread, you have to pay extra if you get your sandwich on Ezekiel bread, right? It's very healthy, and we like to have all those seeds and lentils in it. It's delicious. I have some right here, some Scandinavian fiber crisps. They taste like cardboard, but they're expensive. Okay, so Ezekiel bread is back in style. All right, next Mishnah. Noten Adam ma'a lechen vani ולנחתום כדי שיזכה לו עירוב דברי רבי אליעזר. Okay, so now the final topic is vicarious acquisitions if I'm not doing it myself. So here's something you can do if I want to join in an eruv. So I go to the baker and give him a coin. And I say, this will be for the eruv. So maybe the baker would collect money from instead of everybody coming and giving a loaf, right? It might be a lot of work. Everybody comes and gives the baker a coin, and then the coin will take all that money and get one nice big loaf, and that will be the eruv. And that is fine. You can do that. Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer was also in the previous Mishnah. Okay, good. So that sounds like a great idea. The problem is it's controversial. Chachamim say no, you cannot do it. Money does not give you an acquisition to an item. Okay, so let me just introduce this idea. In halacha, if you want to acquire something, you actually have to lift it. You have to pick it up or do something else. If just paying for it doesn't transfer possession to you. So this would have a practical difference. For example, if you go to a Starbucks and you order, a coffee and apple juice, and so you pay for it first, right? And then they bring it, they put it out on the counter after. So the difference, so let's say they put it on the counter and then someone else steals it or it spills. So if you didn't pick it up yet, then you didn't acquire it. So it's their responsibility to replace it, give you a new one. Even though you paid for it, it's not yours till you pick it up. But let's say you went and they put it there and you picked it up, and then you got a phone call or something, so you put it down again. Well, once you pick it up, now it's yours. So if at that point it gets stolen or it spills, it's your problem, right? You had it, and so they would not have a legal responsibility to replace it. Okay, so the application in this case is I gave the coin to the baker, but by giving the coin to the baker, that doesn't help me acquire the rights to a piece of the bread. If the baker has in mind and says, "Oh, I'm picking this up on behalf of on behalf of that person," then fine. But the assumption is he doesn't do that because the baker is used to taking money and buying and selling. Okay, so you didn't do an action in order to acquire something in that bread. Okay, so that's what Chachamim say. However, umodim bishar kol adam shezachu lo ma'otav shen me'arvin la'adam ella midato. However, Chachamim do agree that if it's not a baker, if I just ask Mark to do it for me, and I say, Mark, can you here's a coin, can you help me be joined in the eruv? There, the assumption is I'm not giving him a coin to buy the bread because he's not a baker. Rather, I'm giving him a coin for the trouble of going ahead and doing the work and picking it up and placing it wherever it needs to be placed on my behalf. So therefore, in that case, Mark is actually picking it up for me. That's good. But we assume that the baker is only doing a monetary transaction and is not going to go and pick it up on my behalf. And so that is the distinction between the Makon and Chachamim. And he explains because you can't do it ela mida'ato. Is explaining why the baker case is no good according to Chachamim because he's not doing it for you. He's not going to have you in mind when he picks it up. Okay, good. And now the last part of the Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, B'amed amorim be'eruve techumin. So he's qualifying this last statement here when it says you have to, the person has to be in agreement. It's a little bit of slippage, I think, between the way this term is being applied. Are you doing it for him? Does he agree to it? Right. So Rabbi Yehuda says, when do I need to agree to it if you're doing it on my behalf? That's in the Eruv Techumin. Why? Because in Eruv Techumin, if you go ahead without my knowledge and put Eruv Techumin 2,000 amot to the east, right? So maybe you're doing me a favor because let's say I want to go that way, but maybe not because maybe I want to go to the west. So therefore, you cannot do it on my behalf without my agreement and to it. If either I have to tell you that I did it or if to announce it and I say okay. So that's when you need the agreement. Aval בעירובי חצרות מערבין לדעתו שלא לדעתו, לפי שזכין לאדם שלא בפניו ואין חייבין לאדם שלא בפניו. Because, so in Eruv Chatzerot, you don't have to get my permission. You can do it on behalf of everyone, even if I don't even know about it or agree to it, because you can always give merit to someone without whether he's there or not. But you cannot give a disadvantage to someone if he's not there. So this is an important principle that has a lot of applications, and this is one of the main sources for it. So we assume that everybody will be benefited by the right to carry. And so, I don't have to carry if I don't feel like it. But now that I know, if you join me in the Eruv, you're using your own money, your own food, and you're joining me in. So that's a benefit for me. So then I don't have to agree to it because there's no reason for me not to agree.
It's repetitive. We've said it a number of times.
We did say it a number of times, and we quoted this yesterday. But yesterday, when we quoted it, we were quoting this. So this is the original Mishnah, right? Yesterday, we were wondering, hey, why, is this true? There seemed to be someone who disagreed with it. Because in that case, in yesterday's Mishnah says, if new people join the Eruv, and then I have to, and I'm using their food, I have to let them know. And you say, well, I don't have to let them know. I'm doing something beneficial for them. So that seems to disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. So we asked that yesterday because that other Mishnah came up. So we already quoted this. That's why it's repetitive. But you're right, it is repetitive because we're going to go through the same exercise today. Okay. All right. So we start with the beginning. My tamad Rabbi Eliezer, halo mashach. Now, now that we explained the Chachamim so well, what's the reason for the Rabbi Eliezer? How come he says you can give it to a baker? I didn't pull it. I didn't pick it up. And so there's no active acquisition for the bread. So how could that work? Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Abba Abhu, Asaon Rabbi Eliezer ka'arba'a perakim ba'shana ditnan. Ba'arba'a perakim elu mashchitin et hatabach בעל כורחו, אפילו שור שווה 1,000 דינר, ואין ללוקח אלא דינר אחד, כופין אותו לשחוט. Okay, so he's going to give an analogy now. There are some times where you can acquire something even without picking it up, just by money. And where do we see that? He's going to eventually say that the Doraita law is that you can just use money, and the Strabanan that say you need to pick it up. So where do we see that original law being applied? This is a Mishnah in Masechet Chulin that talks about butchers. So at 4 times during the year, mashchitin et hatabach. This does not mean that you slaughter the butcher, but rather you force the butcher to slaughter. In other words, the butcher is kind of like a public/private run utility, right? Everybody relies on the butcher, so it's not simply a business. Most of the year, you could decide: is there a need? Should I slaughter a cow, an ox? Are enough people going to buy it? But before holidays, the 3 Degalim and Rosh Hashanah, where people want to buy meat, so even if it's just a few people that want to buy meat, even one person. The butcher has to slaughter even a big animal, even if it's an ox that's worth 1,000 dinar, and there's only one buyer who is just only going to buy 1 dinar's worth. Still, the butcher has to kill that big ox and risk taking a loss, because that's part of his responsibility. He has to make sure that one customer will have meat for the holiday, and so we force him to buy it. Lefichach. And therefore, since we forced the butcher to kill it because of this one guy who just gave a dinar, so if it should die before he gets a chance to slaughter it, as if he already acquired it. And so the buyer now has to bear the responsibility, and he loses his money. He can get a non-kosher piece of meat, but that won't help him much. So here you have a case where he actually, because we're forcing the butcher, he shouldn't have to take the risk. So therefore, you see that he acquires the possession of the animal or piece of the animal just with money, even though he didn't pick it up yet. Okay. Met la lokeach, halo mashach. So we wonder, Why? How could it be? How could it belong to the buyer? He didn't. He didn't pick it up. He didn't pull it. So at first we say maybe he did pull it. Maybe he did pick up the animal. You can't say that he pulled it because the rest of that Mishnah says on the rest of the year, this is not true. The rest of the year, where the butcher can decide whether he wants to kill an animal today or not, then in that case, if it dies, before he gets a chance to slaughter it, the butcher takes the loss, right? So why should the butcher take the loss if there were buyers there and they picked it up? So therefore, obviously, Mishnah is talking about a case where he did not pick it up or pull the animal. In case of a live animal, it's hard to pick up. If he didn't pull the animal, and still, even though he didn't pull the animal in those 4 times of the year, he still acquires it. So you see, it's possible to acquire something without pulling an animal, and that's what Rabbi Eliezer could be relying on. Amar Rabbi Shimon bar Yitzchak, L'olam b'shelo mashach, hachar b'askinan, b'shezika lo al yedei ached. Right. So just confirming, he did not pull it, but rather he conferred possession by someone else. He told someone else, "Listen, this buyer is going to come in, and so take it on his behalf." Good. Now, how can you do that? How can he tell someone, acquire it on behalf of this particular person? All right, if he's not there. Well, you can, because we give merit to someone even when he's not there, and we assume that it's Yom Tov and he's going to want to have the meat, and so it's permitted. But the rest of the year, who knows? Who says he wants to spend money? A lot is very expensive, and to buy meat just on a regular weekday or regular Shabbat, he may not want to. So I can't tell you acquire it, and then he's going to have to pay. Right? That's a disadvantage. So therefore, you'd have to get his permission. Okay. So the point is that we do have cases where you can acquire something just with money. Now, what's the mechanism? How does it work? During these 4 time periods, it's true, in general, you can't acquire with money. But during these 4 times, the rabbis revert back to the Oraita law. Because the Torah law says, paying with money is sufficient to transfer ownership. And it's the rabbis that came after and made a takana to say that it does not. I mean, regarding monetary things, the rabbis have a lot of leeway, because they could say, hefker betin hefker. If the betin says this belongs to you, doesn't belong to you, they have the right to transfer any money that they want. And so they could say, even though you paid for it, this property is not yours. Why did they do that? What's the purpose of this takana? Why did they say you have to pull it? Because we're afraid what's going to happen. Let's say I come in, I pay you, and I buy $100 worth of fruit. And then you'll say, okay, you come and get it tomorrow. I come tomorrow, you say, oh, it burned down. So now I'm at a loss, right? And it's really not my problem. And maybe you're lying, and maybe you weren't careful, and so this is going to cause a lot of fights. And therefore, the transfer of ownership does not happen until it actually is delivered into my hands, and that avoids lawsuits and problems. So that's why the rabbis did that. But since it's only the Rabbanan, when it's appropriate, the rabbis also can say that money does transfer. All right, so all that was the explanation of Rabbi Eliezer that says I can give it to the butcher even though it's only money, and the butcher, by accepting that money, can join me in the Eruv, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, now the rabbi said, Modim bishar kol adam. Rabbi said that regarding other people, if I just give you a coin, that's fine. Man shar kol adam, what are you talking about? Like who? Amara balabait, right? Another homeowner. I go to my neighbor and I say, here's a coin, please join me in the Eruv. That's fine, that works. Because I assume that when he has that money, he's going to actually pick it up and acquire the bread on my behalf. Shmuel said the same thing. So Rav and Shmuel agree. He said this explicitly. The Mishnah is only talking. The problem in the Mishnah is only talking about a baker, but in homeowner would be fine. He also gave further explanation of the Mishnah, that the only problem would be if I give him money. But if I go to even the baker and I give him an item, right? I give him a jar and I say, here, I want to acquire the eruv with this jar. That's fine because I can make an acquisition through an exchange. It's called kinyan chalipin. We do this when we make a ketubah, right? We'll give the groom a handkerchief, and by accepting the handkerchief, he gives all of the responsibilities and obligations in the ketubah. And so that is a legal transferring. He actually is the wife to be acquires all of the things in the ketubah once he picks up the handkerchief. So picking up an exchange item is enough. And so to here the butcher, by taking that whatever I give him, a jar, then he is effectively giving over to me a share in the bread that he has set aside for the eruv. Also, it depends on what language I use when I say to go to the baker. If I say acquire on my behalf, that's no good because I don't, it doesn't get acquired until I pick it up. But if I say make an eruv for me, then that's explicit. He's going to go and he knows he's making an eruv for you. Then he'll pick it up and he'll do whatever he needs to so that I do acquire it. And so in that case, he acts the same way as a homeowner does, and that would be fine. Okay, so and with all this, it's a very small problem. This baker, this very small limitation, in most cases would work. All right, and finally, the last part of the Mishnah, Amar Yehuda, Bamed b'mamorim v'chuleh. Amar Rav Yehuda, right? This is Rabbi Yehuda who makes a distinction between eruv techumin, where it's a problem for me if you can't make an eruv techumin and restrict where I can walk. So there, you need my agreement. But eruv chatzerot don't need. Then you don't need my agreement. It's good for me. So Shemuel says, this is still Shemuel said a lot of things. Halacha Rabbi Yehuda, that we actually in fact follow halacha Rabbi Yehuda, that you can make an eruv for someone without their agreement. And not only here, any opinion that Rabbi Yehuda says in regard to the laws of Eruvin, we follow his opinion. Okay, very good. Amar le Rav Chana Bagdata'a le Rav Yehuda. This is Rav Chana who came from Baghdad. That's interesting. All these yeshivot that we learn about, Surah, Pumbedita, and Hardea, they're all different places in Mesopotamia along the banks of the rivers. But in the times of the Geonim, they all moved to Baghdad, like in the 800s. Because Baghdad was the capital of the Islamic Empire, so that's the place you want it to be. Have the big community there, and you could have a lot of influence through the trade routes there. So by that time, Baghdad was a huge place. But at this time, now we're talking about the early centuries. Baghdad was probably just a small suburb. But anyway, it did exist, and it did have that name, Baghdad, even before the Islamic conquest. Okay, so that's interesting to see his name from that city. Anyway, he told Rav Yehuda, Amar Shemuel, afilu b'mavoy shenitelu korotav ole hayav. Do we follow Rabbi Yehuda even regarding the permission to carry in a mavoy that whose crossbeam was taken away? So, right, if you have an alleyway and you had either a crossbeam or a pole, and it was permitted in the beginning of Shabbat, and let's say it fell down, it was taken away in the middle of Shabbat. Now, do you say, oh, it's not a good mavoy anymore, and you can't carry? Some said it's a problem. Rabbi Yehuda said it doesn't matter if it was there in the beginning of Shabbat, then it's okay for the whole Shabbat. So, do we follow that halacha of Rabbi Yehuda even in that regard? Because that is in Masechet Eruvin. No, I meant the laws of Eruvin, of making the Eruv. That has to do with mechitzot, of making sure that you have proper partitions. And then, so I only meant that we follow him regarding bringing the bread together and making the Eruv, not regarding partitions. Okay, so we don't always follow him. Good. Amar Rav Acha Bered Rava Rav Asher Halacha Mikilal de Pelige. If you're telling me here that we he asks asking us to Rav Asher, you said here above that we follow halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda in this Mishnah. Right, Shemuel said that here. Now, if you say halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that you don't need permission in order to transfer, in order to make an eruv for someone. Well, if you say halacha is like him, then the inference is there's someone who disagrees, right? So that the question is really in this Mishnah because it has two parts. Right, you have the Eliezer and then Chachamim, and then the Biuda. Is Biuda arguing on the Chachamim that come before him, or is he simply explaining what came before him? So we understood so far that he's simply explaining what came before him. So why do you have to say halacha is like a Biuda if he's only explaining what Chachamim say and everybody actually agrees? So from the fact that he said halacha is like him, must be you interpreting this that he disagrees, and Chachamim would disagree with this, and they would say that even in Eruv Chatzerot, you do need to get permission. So that's what we're going to analyze. And this, Moselle, was what you were asking about before. This is what we talked about yesterday. So this is the reason for the repetition. Okay. So does someone disagree? We have another rule that anytime you have Rabbi Yehuda mentioned in the Mishnah using the language of ematai or ubameh. In other words, there's chachamim that say one halacha, and the Rabbi Yehuda comes and says, and when is that true, right? In what case is it true? So there he's just giving a clarification. The halacha that you said only applies in this particular case. That is all a commentary, not an argument. And in our case also, he says that language of Bamed Devarim Amorim. So you see that according to the Yoshua ben Levi, it's only an explanation. And according to Shemuel's law here, halacha Rabbi Yehuda, then that sounds like it's an argument. So which is it? Is it Yehuda arguing, or is he simply explaining? Okay. Now, so regarding what Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, he's only explaining. We say, "Vela pilige." Really? Is he not? Is he only explaining? Is he not? Does he not argue? In the Mishnah we saw yesterday, we saw that if we have a courtyard and we made an eruv, and then new people move into the neighborhood, and then I have to go and get more food, pick it up, and I have to sadich leodi, I have to tell them. So that means I need their agreement in order to join them in the eruv or in the shituf. Oh, so you see that they do need their agreement, and so there is a machloket, right? That was a stam tana. So the Yehuda disagrees with them. Right? No, maybe not. Maybe that case where I need their agreement was a case where I have a courtyard between two mevaot. And so therefore, if I have that courtyard and I make an eruv with the one on the left, with the mavor on the left, then they can only use that one and not the one on the right. And so therefore, by joining them into my mavor on the left, I'm actually giving them a problem. And who says that they want to go to the left? Maybe they want to go to the right. So that is a situation where doing a shituf mevaot is not necessarily good for them. I have to get their agreement to see which one they want to join up with. And so that's why in that case, we need to get their permission. But in a general case where there's only one mavoy, or if it's just one chatzer, then indeed you don't have to get their permission. And so in that way, we can explain that the previous Mishnah is agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda, and there is no machloket. So that's how Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi could respond to that. All right, let's see. Does that work? Rav Shizbi in the name of Rav Chisda says regarding that Mishnah before, he didn't interpret it this way, that it has to be talking about two mivaot with a courtyard in the middle. Who says it's talking about that? He over there said that there is a machloket, and that's talking about a standard case. In that standard case yesterday, when people move in, I have to get their permission. That means I do need their permission, and that disagrees with the Rabbi Yehuda. So you see that there is a problem. Ela gabra gabra karamet. So we answer, well, we're talking about two amoraim. What do you have a problem that two amoraim have different opinions? Mosabar pilige, mosabar la pilige. So we have Rav Chisda here. He thinks that they do argue with each other, whereas Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi thinks they don't argue with each other. And so Shemuel, who said that halacha is like a Yehuda, he must have thought they do argue with each other. Okay, fine. So he can follow. He can agree with Rav Chisda, or Rav Chisda could agree with him. Okay, so we have in the end we have two different ways of explaining this these series of Mishnayot. Either that Rabbi Yehuda is just explaining what came before, or he's arguing on what came before. Either way, the halacha does follow him. Okay, now gufa, right, which means that we're going to now requote something we just said and analyze it further. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, kol makom shamar Rabbi Yehuda ematay b'meh b'mishnatenu eno ela lefaresh divrei chachamim. So anytime, right, that's Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, anytime, anywhere in the Mishnah, not just in this Masechet, in all of Mishnah, that Rabbi Yehuda says this limiting word, that this case law is only true here and there, then he's only explaining, not arguing. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, not quite. Ematai lefaresh, ubameh lahalok. Ematai is an explanation word, right? I'm agreeing with you, but it only applies here. Bameh is arguing. It says, you said it in all cases, but I think that it only applies in this particular case. So you have to distinguish. So there's machloket here about between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi about which words mean what, whether the word bameh means that an agreement or a disagreement. Okay, now that we know that, let's apply it to a particular case, and this will be the bring us to the end of the perek. V'ematai lefareshu, is that true that ematai? Actually, they agree that the word ematai is always an explanation. Both Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan. Let's test it out on a Mishnah from Masechet Sanhedrin. David and Mark, we learned this together last year. This perek we learned at Be'iyun, right? V'hatanan. Ve'eluhen ha'pesulin. The in third perek of Mishnah Sanhedrin says who can be a witness and who cannot be a witness. These the following are disqualified from being witnesses. Hamesachek bekubya, someone who plays with kubya, cubes, dice, right? Someone who's a dice player, meaning a gambler. Umalvebedi beat someone who lends money with interest. Pigeon racers, and those who get money from selling shivi'it produce. You're not allowed to grow things on shivi'it, and even things that grow on their own are free for anyone. You can't sell them and make money on them. All these people cannot be good witnesses, right? The gambler, he doesn't care about money very much. Well, we'll see why. Okay, so all these people are not trustworthy. Now, that Mishnah continues and says, Amar Biyuda ematai bizman she'en lo umanut elahi, abal yesh lo umanut shelohi hareze kasher. Is an important opinion. When do I say a gambler is disqualified from being a witness? When that's his only profession. He's a professional gambler. He has no job. And so all his money comes from gambling. That person is no good. You see that he has, he's not a responsible citizen. He's not productive. He doesn't value money, comes and goes easily. And so you can't trust him to testify about other people's money. But if he does have a job and he gambles a little on the side, then that's okay. Then he's a responsible citizen. Okay. So that's the Mishnah. Now, he says ematai. So is Rabbi Yehuda simply explaining what the Tanakama said, right? Not all gamblers, only this kind of gambler. He's explaining, and the Tanakama would agree. That's what it would seem from the rule of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan. But there's a braita that says the opposite. V'taneh ala b'braita. Chachamim omerim ben she'en lo manut elahi uben sheyesh lo manut shelo hi. There's braita that according to Chachamim, whether he has another job or not, it does not matter. Even if he has another job, he's still pasul le'edut. So you see, the point here is not because he's a lowlife or is not a responsible citizen, but rather something about gambling itself that's like stealing, right? The problem is that when we put money in the pot, I'm not expecting to lose, I'm expecting to win. And then if you win and take my money, right? So I never gave you permission really to take it. I feel bad about it. And so any winnings from gambling are really thievery. So therefore, anyone who wins at gambling is a thief. That's actually only if you win. If you lose, if you gamble and you lose, then you're still okay, according to this reason. Ahi did Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rabbi Tarfon he. So this was the question, because this paraita sounds like Chachamim think that even someone who does have a job is not a good gambler. And here you see Rabbi Yehuda says only someone who has no other job. And so it's impossible to say that Rabbi Yehuda is explaining Chachamim and they're all in agreement, right? Because we have a paraita that says Chachamim disagree. And so this is an exception to the rule of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi that said that ematai is always explaining. Over here, it's not explaining; it's a machloket. Oh, okay. So we answer, Hahi, this baraita is not the chachamim up here. The chachamim here agree with Rabbi Yehuda that if you have a job, it's okay. This chachamim in this baraita is another opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Tarfon, he detanya. Here's yet another baraita that's named Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Tarfon le'olam en echad mehen nazir lefish en nazirut ela lehafla'a. This baraita does not have to do with being a witness, but rather if someone makes a bet and says, if this and this is true, I'll be a nazir. If it's not true, I won't be a nazir. If this guy who's coming here is a nazir, then I'll be a nazir, right? And so you're making a bet based on something, then no good. Even if it's true, even if what he bets about comes out, the way he said would accept it, he's still not a nazir. Why? Because a vow of becoming a nazir is not applicable unless it was for sure from the outset. It has to be based on something definite, not based on something unknown. It's not a commitment. Okay, Alma, kevan de mesapek alei naziri la nazirhu la mishtabe nafshe. Right, since he's not sure if he decided to be a nazir or not, it does, and then he's not a nazir. He didn't have in mind and say, I'm going to be a nazir. No one takes a bet going in thinking that they're wrong, right? You always kind of assume I'm right and I'm going to win. And so you never agreed mentally to actually submit yourself to becoming a nazir. And here too, so to here, when I'm playing poker and I put the money in, I still think that's my money because I still think I have the winning hand, and or I'm going to bluff and the other guys are going to go out and all the money is going to be mine. I never agree to put the money in the pot and give it over. And therefore, if I lose, then I consider as if the other person stole my money and I'm resentful at him and I want it back. And therefore, the other guy who won the money is a thief. And so that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Tarfon. And so we prove that this baraita that says Chachamim is actually the single opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Tarfon. But all the other opinions of Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim here think that's not because of thievery, but rather because the person is not a productive member of society, and therefore he's not trustworthy to testify about other people's money. Hadran Allah Halon. All right, we saw many important cases and examples, and Chazakim Ubruchim. We will return to you the Perek of Halon. Baruch Adonai L'olam.